So today's lesson is called Jesus' Unique Concept of God. For the last 2 weeks, I have been talking about one of the truly great books in the Unity movement, Discover the Power Within You, by Reverend Eric Butterworth. The book proposes the very simple yet very radical idea that the true message of Jesus was not his divinity, but the divinity of man, of each and every one of us. Early in the book, it says, the book calls for a rediscovery of the teachings of Jesus, a reappraisal of the achievements of his life, and a renaissance of the Christian faith. That is one of the central messages of the New Thought movement, that when it comes to Christianity, that is to say, the true message of Jesus, we missed the point. We got it wrong. When I first came to Unity, I heard a minister say, what became traditional Christianity really should be called Paulism, because the central message, and we all know what it is, the blood of Jesus, the resurrection, is not about the life and the teachings of Jesus at all. It is rather about the life that Paul, as an apocalyptic Jew, believed and promoted. Now, to his credit, were it not for Paul, you see, there was a lot of different sects in Judaism, and the one that Jesus led was one of them. And had it not been for Paul, then Christianity would have taken the route that that all the other sects basically took, and that was to go into oblivion. And then the dominance of Paul's theology is clear because over half of the New Testament writings are either by Paul or somehow or another attributed to Paul or associated with Paul. That is interesting, given that Paul never met Jesus. And I don't know if you know that. Paul never met Jesus. And he hardly ever references Jesus. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it says, Jesus spoke all these things to the crowds in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. The parables comprise over 1/3 of Jesus' words. That would suggest that Jesus felt that his message and his method of teaching, because he was a master teacher, there was a lot to be said about the parables. Yet, Paul doesn't seem to place the same emphasis on them. And while it is true that Paul wrote before the Gospels, he was a very highly educated man. He surely would have known about the parables. So while Paul did essentially give rise to Christianity, it was his version that really meant one, I guess, that came out, that prevailed. And by his version, I mean a version that is heavily influenced by Zoroastrian beliefs that were very prevalent at that time. And those of you who attend Let's Get Metaphysical have some idea of Zoroastrianism because we saw a video on it. But let me get everybody up to speed. Zoroastrianism, trying to say that one, forget transcendentalism, that one's easy. Zoroastrianism was a religion that had existed in this area in the Middle East for some 800 to 1400, so average 1,000 years before Jesus. Here's the point. It had been around for so long, and it was so prevalent, that it was the model of the universe that everybody pretty much had in their minds, what's called embedded theology. So how they ended up taking these beliefs into the new religion that became Christianity is understandable, because that was their starting point. For them, that was the model of the universe. What I don't understand is how it still exists. That is a very strange idea to me. So while most Christians now believe that they're following Jesus, they're really following Zoroastrianism. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Let's get metaphysical. Because part of it is to be open to new ideas. And part of it is to be open to old ideas. Because we want to know, where did we get these beliefs from? How did we get to this point? And when I saw the video on Zoroastrianism, I learned that it was the major influence of all the Abrahamic religions. You're familiar with that term, Abrahamic. Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So here we have these three major religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. They have completely influenced the entire Western civilization and our theology of it. They have the same parent, Zoroastrianism. They are family. They're brothers and sisters. They all agree that there's but one God. They all are monotheistic. Yet, the curious thing is that they can't agree on the name of this one God. That is very strange. And they fight and kill each other over this difference. That is so sad, but it's so true. And what do I keep saying over and over? We're not looking at the big picture. Generally speaking, yes, religion is actually right. God did come to this world. There is only one God. But when we get to the little picture of the details of it, my version of it or your version of it, then we get all lost. In Spanish, we have a saying, se ahogan en un charco, we say. And that means they drown in a puddle. Se ahogan en un charco. You know, they say it's a really, it's a pretty minor problem. People get all confused about it, and it's pretty clear. And that's the saying we use. And that pretty much sums up religion. Don't drown in a puddle. Rise up and see the big picture. So let me give you a short list of ideas that represent Zoroastrianism. See if any of them sound familiar. The first is the idea of a three-tiered universe. There's heaven, there's earth, and then down below, there's a hell. That's the structure of the universe in Zoroastrianism. Does that sound familiar? I think it kind of does. Then, this is another big one. There are two forces at work in the universe. One is a good force, and one is the evil force. And they're constantly in battle with one another. That sounds familiar. Is that Christian? Nope. Zoroastrian. What about this one? At the end of your life, you will face judgment. It will be a moral judgment, not based on your successes or on your status, but on whether you were a good person or a bad person. If you were a good person, you will be sent to paradise. If you were a bad person, you will be placed in a place of torment and suffering. And at the end of all time, everybody who had ever lived will be resurrected and face a final judgment to determine where it is that you will spend all of eternity. Now, does this sound familiar? Is it Christian? No, it is not. It is Zoroastrian. Let me repeat something. These ideas were embedded theology, meaning everybody pretty much accepted them as true. This is the way the structure of the universe was for them. And the odd part is it is still so for the vast majority of people. I find that I don't get it, but that's just, go to any Christian church and you will hear exactly these words. And they're not the teachings of Jesus. Now you know. You're going to go in there and say, this is all Zoroastrianism. First century man had this model of the universe in their heads. And so and they were looking for a Messiah, when Jesus came along and Paul bought into the idea that Jesus was a Messiah, he basically took Jesus and plugged it into this formula. And that's what we have. So the chapter on God, or Jesus' unique concept of God, begins by saying Jesus had a unique concept of God. To him, God was not an object of worship, but a presence dwelling in us, a force surrounding us, and a principle by which we live. He goes on, the thing that makes Jesus' concept of God so unique is that his gospel was set against the backdrop of the Old Testament deity, one who wiped out whole cities, who was jealous, angry, vengeful, and who both loved and hated, created and destroyed, blessed and cursed. This is the God that Jesus came into, to the people believing in this. So Jesus came along and said, let me tell you about a different God. He said, let me tell you about a God of love, a God of forgiveness, a God of all-inclusiveness, and a God that is within. Butterworth continues, unfortunately, the God concept that dominates most Christian theology is the primitive concept of pre-Mosaic Israel. And Jesus, with his unique concept of God, never had his say in Christian churches. And that's what we say in unity. If we had taken the path of Jesus and his life examples of loving everyone, forgiving everyone, healing, that Christianity would have become unity, basically. But we went the other direction. And so the book says, if you ask most people, do you believe in God? Then everybody's like, well, of course I believe in God. But what happens when you ask them, well, what is your conception of God? How do you, have you thought about that? What is your conception of God? What do you see? You still see that big man in the sky stuff? Because most people will answer, well, the man upstairs. We still have that idea. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. He was saying that God was within. So why aren't we teaching Jesus' ideas? Well, we in Unity are, actually. He says God is spirit, God is love. God loves everyone, forgives everyone. What? Forgives anyone? What happened to the final judgment stuff? We say, well, again, that's Zoroastrianism. That's what you want to believe. That's fine. Freddie Mercury was a Zoroaster, so you're in good company. Jesus' concept of God was very, very unique, and it was beautifully told. And I've shared the message with you. Beautifully told in the parable of the prodigal son. These are the words of Jesus. And it's all about forgiveness. We've talked about that. Remember when the son finally comes back and he says, you know what, Father, I don't even deserve to be your son. You make me a slave or a servant or whatever you want to do. And the reaction of the father in the story is that he doesn't even respond to the petition. It's like he doesn't hear it. I'm not concerned about what you did. You'll come back home, and I accept you with open arms. That is the message, Jesus. That old message that we've hung on for 2,000 years, we must release. It no longer serves us. We need to see it as what it is or was. The consciousness of primitive man. Acknowledge it, bless it, release it. That is what we seek to do here in Unity, to find a bigger and bigger God. Because I saw somewhere that, I did a lesson one time called, How Big is Your God? and the thing is, it's proportionally as big as your consciousness is. Because as your consciousness expands, so does your concept of God. It's plain and simple as that. So God fits into whatever mold you have, whatever lens, as we say, you are looking through. So as we begin to see an ever-expanding consciousness and a bigger concept of God, then we start moving away from the idea that we are miserable sinners. And we start moving into the idea that we're masters of the universe. Masters of the universe? Me? No. What an idea, right? Cannot be. Do you think of yourself that way? A master of the universe? And yet, this is exactly what the Bible tells us at the very beginning. Created in the image and likeness of God. So if I keep saying, that's the starting point. How can you undo that? You're saying that you can undo something that God did? Well, you can think you undid it, and I think that's what we kind of teach in Unity, that we have free will, and so we can believe these things. It doesn't make them true. However, it does make them true in a sense that we say that whatever it is that we believe, we experience. So you experience a separation. You experience yourself being a pitiful sinner because that's what you believe. And do it to you as you believe, we are told. So the other next chapter is called exactly that, From Miserable Sinners to Masters. And it begins with a quote by Walt Whitman. It says, I say no man has ever yet half been half devout enough. None has ever yet adored or worshiped half enough. None has begun to think of how divine he himself is and how certain the future is. Because we don't believe it. Because it's such a hard thing to undo. The idea that we are divine by nature is a very hard sell. It really is. It is so ingrained. And I'm here to try to sell that to you and to myself as well. And the funny thing is, I don't have to sell it to you. You already own it. It's a weird thing. We got to change how we see things. Butterworth picks up, Christianity has been exclusive and sectarian. Growing up, that was, I think, my first complaint of Christianity. It is exclusive in nature. Listen to it. It says my way or the highway, there is only one way. And for me, this is step number one, and I'm done. It cannot be exclusive in nature. It has to be about everybody. And so he says, Christianity has been exclusive and sectarian, but if Jesus' concept of the divinity of man could be clearly understood and widely disseminated, his teaching would sweep the world and create a spiritual revolution. Wow. And he goes on, the central theme, this is really key. The central theme of Christianity has been sin and evil. Somebody just told me that recently. I don't want to say names, but you know who you are. They went with family to a traditional church, and that person, it's a she, but that's most of you. and the person said, I almost wanted to just walk out because I said, I don't want to hear this anymore. I don't. He said, the central theme of Christianity has been sin and heaven. We have heard more about hell than heaven, more about the devil than about God. And though we have been presented the picture of Jesus' mastery, man has always been pictured as a poor, miserable sinner. There has been a kind of hopelessness in Christianity's attitude toward man. It is as if we were taught that man is a sinner, same yesterday, today, and forever. And that all we have to look forward to is to becoming a good sinner. That's what we have to, I'm going to share something with you because I didn't have it on the lesson, but when I took all the great courses, by myself, I learned something that I had never thought about. The professor in this one course says that, the traditional view, as you know, and again, I'm not being critical, it's important to understand these things to me, and so that I can share them with you. And he says, God only had one son, Jesus, so that's the standard view. And so that the best it's like similar to this being a good sinner, the best we can hope for is to become an adopted son of God through belief in Jesus. And I went, wow, I never thought about that. Because there's only one son. So you cannot be a son of God, even though it says so in the Bible that we're sons of God. You cannot be that. Best you can do is be an adopted son. Wow. And once again, that was not the message of Jesus. Over and over, Jesus discovered the divine dimension in mankind. And he proved that man could live it and find fulfillment through it. More than this, Butterworth says, he believed it to be repeatable. Because he said, ye therefore shall be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect. It says in Matthew. So Butterworth notes that the concept of original sin was not something Jesus taught. It was a deliberate creation of theologians in early Christianity. Now, why do you suppose they would do that, Ann Kennedy? You know the answer to this. It is because of control. You see, the story and the consciousness kept evolving and changing, and some of them started taking note that, well, Jesus was saying that we can be just like he is, and that we have the same potential. These people were called Gnostics, and they presented a challenge to the church, a threat to the church. And because if the teachings are something that I can achieve, what do I want you, church, for? And so the early church fathers met and drew up decrees stating that Jesus was very much God, that came from heaven and took the form of man. And to make the distinction between Jesus and us unmistakable, the doctrine formulated the degradation of man, the original sin by which man would forever be cursed with the stigma of humanity. You can never be a son, only an adopted son, hopefully. So in Unity, as you know, we don't believe in original sin. We believe in original virtue. Created in the image and likeness of God. That's the starting point. That is to believe in original sin. I used to say it all the time. Well, so what, God made me flawed? I'm starting the whole process flawed? That doesn't make any sense to me. Besides, how can something perfect create something imperfect? Have you ever thought about that? Wouldn't that make God imperfect by definition? It seems like it. I just wonder about things like this. You know me. I mean, like, this is what I do. So I like original virtue a whole lot better. As a final note and a summary of today, in Unity, as you know, we say that Jesus is the great example and not the great exception. And as such, the difference between Jesus and us is not one of inherent spiritual capacity or potentiality. The difference is in our demonstration of it. The degree that we can demonstrate our spirituality is the only difference between you and Jesus. He saw that divinity, he understood it, and he commanded it because he accepted it wholeheartedly. That is what we are working on. This is in fact the unique concept of God that Jesus had, and he came to show us and teach us this. So let's take today a few moments just to contemplate the truth of today's message. If you're comfortable, you may close your eyes and just take a few deep breaths and relax into the moment, this moment of peace and oneness. And breathe in that divinity that is not only in you, but it's all around you. I know the truth that makes me free. The truth about our wholeness. The truth about our oneness. The truth that each of us is an expression of the one divine life. That truth that sets us free is the knowing and living from the realization that all people are the embodiment of this divine love. All of us, equally. I honor that truth by attuning myself to that love that flows in me, through me, and as me. And in doing so, I express harmony and compassion, peace and love. I continue to work on my demonstration whenever I find myself out of that presence. We just keep reminding ourselves, bring yourself back to center. Bring yourself back to center. I know the truth about me, my friends and family, as well as everyone in the world. And I express this truth and I see it in others. I am free to experience blessings beyond measure when I see myself in this way. I invite you all to continue doing our work of being this expression of this one divine presence. And so it is.